Hi friends, hello, hi, how are you? Oh my god, we're off to a great start. Hi friends, hello, hi, how are you? I hope you guys are having an amazing day today. Hello and welcome to today's video. There's a lot happening right now with Anastasia Beverly Hills. There's been a lot that's come out, especially most prominently the people who have been talking about it are people over on Reddit. I've been sent quite a few Reddit threads and tweet threads all about the situation. And honestly, I've wanted to do an evolution of Anastasia Beverly Hills for a while now, just because I think it's an interesting brand to talk about, most notably because I think Anastasia is a really interesting example of a makeup brand that has had a really intense rise and also a really intense fall. I know that in the past few years, I've actually made 2 videos talking about the rise and fall of Anastasia Beverly Hills. And while I like those videos, I actually rewatched them while I was prepping for this video, I do think that they're very surface level in terms of they're more focused on like scandals that were happening, not even scandals, just like critiques of the brand that were happening at the time that I was filming them. And I really wanted to dig deeper and kind of go a little bit more just in depth into how the brand was started, how they got to where they are today, and also talk about a lot of the controversies and problematic behavior that's been surrounding the brand. I think Anastasia for a while in the makeup community, especially the makeup community on YouTube, was kind of viewed as this very prestigious, well-known, super like respected brand in the makeup industry. And I think that that reputation has fallen off in recent years for a number of reasons. And today I want to talk about why. So if you're interested in hearing about the rise and fall of ABH, keep watching. Before we jump into this video, today's video is sponsored, so let's roll to that. Hi friends, editing me here, and today's video is sponsored by Way. Now you guys know I've been using Way for a while now. It's actually been over a year since I started using their products, and I feel like since that started, I've really been on somewhat of a hair journey, and I really accredit Way's products to making my hair just fuller, shinier, just more healthy looking in general, and I wanted to share with you guys some of my favorite products from them today. Very first thing I want to talk about, and I really wanted to talk about this one today because I've been using this one the most lately, and that is the Way Texturizing Hairspray. I have been curling my hair significantly more lately, especially just because the weather's kind of changing. It's hard to know if you're gonna walk outside, at least in New York where I live. It's hard to know if you're gonna walk outside and it's gonna be like 20 degrees, or if you're gonna walk out and it's gonna be humid and windy. I really like to just prepare my hair for any of my surroundings, and the texturizing hairspray is phenomenal. It adds so much volume and oomph. It also really holds, especially my curls, or even if I just straighten my hair, I like spray this on a brush and then brush it through my hair. I love it because it keeps all of your flyaways down, still gives you that volume, but it doesn't make your hair crunchy or stiff. I feel like a lot of times hairsprays can make your hair feel kind of hard and unmoving. Other product I've been loving is the St. Bart's Scalp and Body Scrub. This is actually a limited edition version of the scrub that they already have, but the St. Bart's one is so nice. It just feels so luxurious and bougie. I wish you guys could smell it. If you have like a Sephora near you or an Ulta, I know they sell them there, go smell this. It smells phenomenal. It literally reminds me when I'm using it that I'm like at a spa in Palm Springs. Have I ever been to one? No. Does this make me feel like it? Absolutely. It's such a nice treat for my scalp, and especially really helps getting a lot of the dandruff and just dry skin off of my scalp. And also I love using this on my arms. It makes my arms incredibly soft. And then finally, you already know, I talk about this every time, but I can't help it because by far this is my favorite product from Way. This is their leave-in conditioner. I've gone through so many bottles of this stuff at this point. I use this every single time I wash my hair and get out of the shower. I used to be the type of person that needed a few different leave-in conditioners just in order to fully get my hair not snarly, not have to pull on it while I was brushing it. And I find that not only does this make brushing out my hair after I wash it a lot easier, but also I find that the couple of days after I use this, when I'm not washing my hair doesn't get as tangled and snarly as it usually does. If you're interested in trying any of the products I just mentioned, or any products in general from Way, you can go to theouai.com and use code SMOKY for 15% off your entire purchase. That is theouai.com and use code SMOKY. Again, if you want a leave-in conditioner, I'm telling you, I feel like I always rant about this one, but it's because it's so good. Anyway, let's jump into the video. Anastasia Beverly Hills was founded in 1997 by Anastasia Sor. Was actually born in Romania in 1956. Anastasia actually stayed in Romania for the better part of her child and young adult life. Didn't come to the US until she was 33. She actually spent a lot of her young years studying Romanian history and college, and actually moved to the US in 1989 with her husband and daughter Claudia. She moved to LA at 33 and really wanted to sort of create a life for herself. She was very motivated. I've read a lot of interviews with her kind of scripting this, and it seems like she is a very motivated person and came to the United States with a mission and a goal of just sort of having this great success. She knew that she was good at doing makeup, so she started working at a beauty salon as an esthetician. And kind of how the story goes of how ABH was actually created is that while she was working there, she noticed that there was a real lacking in the beauty space when it came to eyebrows. She said at the time, a lot of people were not putting a ton of thought into their eyebrows. They weren't really putting a ton of thought into how they styled them, how they did them, how they sculpted or created them the way that we do today. People pretty much just left their eyebrows alone. So she started working on a unique technique that involves sculpting and shaping out your eyebrows. She also worked on filling in brows, just doing this sort of thing that most other makeup artists and estheticians weren't doing at the time. And this brow technique actually became incredibly popular, especially in the Beverly Hills area. After perfecting this technique and kind of gaining a bunch of celebrity clientele like Cindy Crawford and Naomi Campbell, she ended up opening a shop in Beverly Hills called Anastasia Beverly Hills. And the main point of this salon was eyebrows, which had really not been done, especially in a time like 1997. There just wasn't something so niche out there in the makeup market, but people absolutely loved it. She had a lot of success in her first few years of business. She was heavily featured in tons of different magazines like Vogue and Elle, and she also appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which at the time was the literal biggest talk show you could get on, where she did Oprah's brows live on air. And this of course boosted and boomed her business even further. I think something that's really interesting and something I actually didn't know was that in 1998, which was just a year after she opened this salon, Anastasia started creating her own products that she would use specifically in this salon. But those products were not for sale for the general consumer. The only way you could really use these products is to go into this salon and have someone use them on you. However, in 2000, she was reached out to by Nordstrom to create a brow kit that could be available for the average everyday consumer, so people who maybe didn't live in Beverly Hills or weren't mega wealthy could still get the same Anastasia technique that they had seen in magazines and on the faces of a ton of different celebrities. The first brow collection included a brow pomade, a brow gel, a brow powder, scissors, and branded tweezers. And also, I've read a couple of articles with Anastasia where she claims that she actually created the dual-ended eyebrow brush, which is the spoolie on one end and the slanted brow brush on the other end. I will say a couple of the publications noted that they couldn't confirm nor deny if this was true, like if she actually invented this product. But regardless of if she actually was the one to invent it, she definitely popularized this technique of sculpting out and filling in eyebrows. It's not as popular mainstream before she started doing it and started selling these products. I think something really interesting about reading Anastasia's sort of beginning phases of this brand is that she was kind of a 2000s version of an Instagram or celebrity makeup brand. A lot of people bought the products because they knew of her. They knew of her reputation. And social media was not really a thing yet. It actually wasn't a thing at all. So she was basically getting all of this hype and recognition and attention from mainstream media outlets. And the brand was so successful because of her face and her presence attached to it, which obviously is a lot harder than today's world where you could just post to your like millions of followers and talk about a product that you're launching. She had to really rely on mainstream news publications and TV shows and news shows to get the word out about her brand. And Anastasia has said that she really like worked hard in the beginning to make this brand more well known. It says on their website, have like a little timeline of their brand. It says that she literally, when the first brow kits launched, she would go to Nordstrom every single weekend on her days off and show people how to use and apply the products to sell them to to people, because despite all of this recognition from celebrities, people were still unsure about how to use these products at home. And this is also something she addressed when she got criticism later on in her career. She said that when these products first came out, it was kind of a hard sell to get people interested in brow products, because a brow product like this had not really existed before she created them. I think it's really easy to look at the success the brand had later on and think that it was just sort of always this staple and that it was always super successful. But there was a lot of hesitation at first with this brand because these products and these techniques were all so new and innovative that people didn't really know what to do with them. This was also at a time when everyone was plucking their eyebrows to absolute filth. So I think it makes sense that like most people didn't even have a lot of eyebrow hair to work with because we were all plucking them into little tiny thin lines. Now, despite this sort of initial hesitation, as people got one, more into makeup, and number two, got more into brow shaping and things like that, the brand started growing exponentially. And by 2006, even though they still had their brow kit in Nordstrom, it was also being featured in Ulta and Sephora, which was obviously a huge push for this brand. I feel like especially at the time in 2006, I know a lot of people really rely now, there are whole entire brands that only sell things via e-commerce. But at the time, being in those kind of top beauty stores was a sort of advertisement that you couldn't even really buy. Like, especially at the time in 2006, it wasn't like it is now where you could pay an influencer to talk about something and you'd have a direct target audience. This was kind of the main way to advertise products, was by being in stores like Ulta and Sephora, where people were going in looking for beauty products, and the Anastasia brow kits were right there. So this shift into makeup stores was huge for the brand, and they started to grow even more. And very quickly, I think Anastasia really made a name for itself as being sort of the go-to brow products. Like, they were the brand that everyone thought of when you thought of if you need a brow powder or tweezers. They were the brand, they were the brow it brand. It's what they were known for. And they definitely carved out that niche in the makeup market really early on and at the right time. I think something really interesting to note here, and something I didn't even realize, was that it actually was quite a while from when the brand started to when they started putting out products that weren't brow related. It was actually years they went with literally just their brow products and not really putting out anything new or innovative. They were just kind of relying on what they had. And while that makes sense at the time, because at the time the makeup market was not nearly as saturated as it is now. There weren't nearly as many brands. There weren't nearly as many product launches happening constantly. So while this made sense, it's still kind of jarring to think about how the makeup market kind of used to be. Because if there was a brand now that started and for years the only product they ever put out was this brow kit, there's no way that that brand would be able to be sustainable and stay afloat just on one product alone. Like, they weren't really a cohesive makeup company until about 2012, when they started actually putting out more cosmetic products. And even though in today's market that would sort of be like a brand's death sentence not putting out products, I think that in a way it really added to the reputation and credibility of ABH. They weren't trying to put out products that were bad for a cheap cash grab. They had good, consistent quality that everybody knew they could rely on, that became everyone's staples. It really worked in making the brand this very respected eyebrow brand. I also think the other benefit to ABH, like I said, is really just that they were the only ones really doing the whole brow thing for a while. Now I feel like you can find brow stuff from every single brand. Everybody has a gel or a pomade or whatever, like tons of different brands have eyebrow pencils and everything like that. But at this time in particular, ABH had really cornered the market, which from a business perspective is genius, because they had a really specific niche. They had something not other people were doing, and they were really, really selling it. Now in 2012, Anastasia Beverly Hills became one of the first makeup brands to start utilizing social media as a way of marketing. They were one of the first brands on Instagram, and to this day, they are the most followed makeup brand on Instagram. In 2012, Instagram had only been around for 2 years, and we were all still using it to post like overly edited photos of Cheez-Its. But Claudia, who actually we know as Norvina, Anastasia's daughter, really saw the potential in Instagram, and even though her mom was really hesitant at first to start using the platform platform as a way to market, they soon realized the power that social media could wield if used correctly. From what I can tell, the brand was really still focused on eyebrow products up until like 2012, 2013. And that's when they started realizing the importance of expanding the brand if they wanted this success to continue. It's obviously great to have one product that everyone loves, but you kind of need more than that, especially with the way that the makeup market was evolving. This is where Norvina actually comes way more into play in the brand. I've actually read a lot of articles and interviews. Even though she didn't take over the brand officially until 2016, in 2012, she was still very much making creative decisions and sort of inputting her ideas and herself into this brand. In a lot of interviews, Norvina has actually talked about the fact that her mom has always been sort of the brow expert, and she is consulted and has the ideas for everything that is brow related with this brand, but that everything else has really come from Norvina and what she thinks would work. In 2013, the brand actually started launching products that weren't brows, and one of the very first ones was the Anastasia Beverly Hills Contour Kit, which especially at the time was just such a staple. I remember I got into makeup in like 2017, and this product was still raved about. Everybody had it in their collection. Everybody used it regularly. Everybody loved it. And this product was so successful that it sold out in their online store in minutes. Very hard to get. And I think that because the brand right off the bat with one of their first big launches had customers experiencing that sort of like, oh, I missed it feeling, it really helped the brand. It gained hype. Everybody was raving about this palette and you couldn't even get it. So every time it would go back into stock, it would sell out again immediately. And this is something that kind of consistently happened with Anastasia Beverly Hills, at least till like 2017, 2018. Every time they would put out a product, it would sell out instantaneously. Like these products were hard to get. And I think that again lended to the credibility of the brand. Also, when they launched this contour kit, they also launched their liquid lipstick lines, which liquid lipsticks had already been around, but it was still something that was a little bit newer. Not a ton of brands were doing them yet. So they were just kind of on the forefront of a lot of these trends that were happening and were doing them before other brands were doing them, which I think really helped keep them ahead in a lot of aspects. Now, like I said, in 2014, I think that there was this sort of makeup boom happening. I think a large reason that was happening was because the popularity of influencers on the internet started growing at a rapid rate. And because Anastasia Beverly Hills picked the perfect time to expand, they were also at the perfect time where they could expand with this growing market and the influencer boom. So they started getting into things like eyeshadow palettes and gel liners. And one of the really interesting things I realized through researching this, which I didn't realize before this, was that Anastasia was one of the first real brands to do influencer collaborations, especially with like eyeshadow palettes. They weren't the first brand, but they definitely were doing it before it was more commonplace to do so. And the other thing I realized is that from the span of like 2014 to 2017, they put out an astronomical amount of products. Like they were doing collab after collab after collab, eyeshadow palette after eyeshadow palette after eyeshadow palette. It was like they did nothing but brows for 12 years. And then all of a sudden they just went bananas producing products and getting their name out there. And I think one of the really interesting things about Anastasia Beverly Hills is that I already noted the Instagram thing, but I think they, kind of similar to brands like Too Faced, I think that they really understood the importance of influencer marketing before a lot of other makeup brands caught on to it. So Anastasia has talked about in interviews how she didn't really rely on sponsored posts the same way that a lot of other brands were doing. Like brands were reaching out to influencers to promote their stuff, paying them. She was much more focused on fostering relationships with influencers. And a lot of influencers have actually spoken about that. Like I remember Samantha Ravindal talking about how she had a meeting with Norvina and like met with her in person and fostered this sort of friendship and relationship. And a lot of other influencers have echoed that sentiment. While a lot of brands were treating influencers kind of just as money signs, like that's the best way to put it. They were just treating them like money symbols. Anastasia Beverly Hills was not doing that. They were not treating people as if they were just money to them. They treated them like friends. They threw parties for them. They sent them PR. They reached out to them and talked to them about things that were not business. They fostered relationships with a lot of the most powerful influencers in the game. And this led to them having some collaborations that really early on were very successful. Like they did a palette with Amrezy back in 2014 that was incredibly successful. Not the one we know about from recently, but like this was way back. And they still had the cardboard packaging and like the 10 pans. And they did palettes with people like like Makeup by Mario, who was a very famous makeup artist at the time. And all of this included with the fact that most of the brand's eyeshadow palettes at the time were limited edition, again, really added to that frenzy around getting their palettes and getting their products, which led to them selling out very quickly. They also had other palettes that were really hyped up, like the Lavish palette, the Self-Made palette, which were really coveted by makeup enthusiasts especially. It kind of became a thing to collect Anastasia palettes before that was even a thing people really thought to do. Like, people were collecting these Anastasia palettes before it was cool, basically. I think for a lot of people, the first ABH palette was the Modern Renaissance, because that's obviously the palette that you think of when you think of ABH. It's Modern Renaissance. That was their most popular palette, and I think a lot of people think that the brand sort of started there. That was definitely a big boom for them and was definitely a way that they got way more mainstream. But at the time, in the sort of beauty YouTube space, the beauty blogger space, the sort of niche online makeup community, they have always been an incredibly popular brand that was incredibly sought after. Now, they weren't only doing eyeshadow palettes, they were releasing tons of different stuff at a rapid rate. The glow kits became a really instant classic. Everyone loved the glow kits. Again, it was something different and new, because while highlighters were starting to gain popularity in 2015, there was not anything really like that on the market. They continually expanded their lipstick range, and they also came out with a line of foundation sticks and cream contours that were incredibly popular, especially amongst makeup artists. That's another really interesting thing about the brand, especially during this time, and I think their collaboration with Makeup by Mario kind of says this, but the brand was really interested in not only appealing to the average everyday consumer, but they were also really interested in appealing to makeup artists. Like, they wanted to make products that you could keep in your kit and have, and also make products that you could keep in your vanity and like pull out all the time. So now we're into about 2016, and this is sort of what I would call like their rise to the top. Like, this was the Anastasia Beverly Hills is Everything era, okay? In 2016, Norvina took over as president of ABH, and while I think Norvina gets a lot of criticism, deservedly, for a lot of the choices and decisions that she has made with the brand, in the beginning of her being in charge, this was when Anastasia Beverly Hills was sort of in like their glory days as a brand. She has just as much to do with the fall of Anastasia Beverly Hills as she does with the rise of Anastasia Beverly Hills. The Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette launched in 2017 and pretty much immediately became like an insanely hyped. They sold millions of these palettes, okay? There had really never been a palette launch like this before. And I think the magic of the Modern Renaissance was not just that it was a really good formula, because even now I can sit here and be like, it was a really good formula then and now. Like, for the time and now, it was a good formula. But not only that, warm toned palettes like this hadn't really existed yet. I think now you can't walk into a makeup store and move more than 5 feet without seeing a red toned, orange toned eyeshadow palette, right? But at the time, this was definitely a little bit more revolutionary for makeup. Like, you either had really colorful, bright palettes, or you had very neutral, cool tones, kind of like the Urban Decay Naked palettes. I would actually argue that the Urban Decay Naked palettes and the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette had a very similar impact in the makeup community in the way that they really started setting trends. The Modern Renaissance was proof that you could wear like orange on your eye, and it could still be an everyday look. You didn't just have to stick to browns and neutrals. You could play with color and use color in your makeup looks without it being this like bright neon colors, which was pretty much the only two options before that. These palettes were also incredibly difficult to get. If you could find one in stores, it was akin to finding a unicorn in store. Like, it was just so impossible to find these palettes, and the impossibility to find them, along with the glowing reviews that the YouTube community was giving the products, really added to this hype and anticipation around the brand and the product. Now, I think the interesting thing about the launch of the Modern Renaissance palette is that this really started a time for the brand where they were not launching a lot. And I think because for a lot of people, the Modern Renaissance was their first introduction into the Anastasia Beverly Hills brand, they started thinking that that was the norm. Like, kind of like I said, a lot of people people were really following them in like the beauty blogger space and that kind of thing. Like a lot of people were interested in the brand, but Modern Renaissance opened them up to an entirely new wave of customers who the Modern Renaissance was their very first purchase from the brand. So a lot of people started thinking that the business practices they followed after that palette launched were what they could expect from the brand. And I think that those expectations are kind of ultimately what led to the downfall of the brand, but we'll get to that. Like a ton of people weren't around in the makeup game or don't really remember when the brand was releasing new products every month and constantly coming out with new eyeshadow palettes, constantly coming out with new face products, glow kits. People weren't as aware of that. So when Anastasia had this sort of lull in putting things out, I think people were really drawn to that and liked it. It added to the hype of the brand. It added to the exclusivity. If a new palette launched, it was like this massive deal. It was this big thing because they really didn't put out palettes as frequently anymore. It seemed like only every year or so around the holiday time is when they would put out their new palette. Pretty much from 2017 till 2018, they had like a year and a half, 2 years where they were like the it brand, like the #1 brand, no questions asked. Everybody bought everything that they put out. They had this like magic spell over the community. And even when they launched the sister palette to the Modern Renaissance, which was the Subculture palette, even when that palette didn't do super well and did not really meet consumer expectations, people were very quick to just kind of write this off as like a one-off and forgive the brand and keep it pushing because they had loved all of the products up till that point. Like it was so many people's favorite brand that they were willing to overlook what was a massive fuck up from the brand with the Subculture palette. And they went on to sell things like the Amrezy highlighter, the Norvina palette, the Sultry palette, the Soft Glam palette. All of these palettes got phenomenal reviews, did super, super well in the YouTube makeup community. And on top of that, people were using their products everywhere. Like you couldn't scroll on makeup Instagram for more than 3 posts without seeing someone tagging Anastasia Beverly Hills in their look because the makeup was just that popular. I do want to talk about Subculture for just a brief second because we're about to get into sort of the downfall. And while at the time the Subculture launch did not really have an impact on ABH, I do think that over time, this is something that's kind of held against them. So like I said, for a year after Modern Renaissance, they did not put out any new eyeshadow palettes. So when they announced that they were going to be putting out the Subculture palette, which had a really unique and interesting color story, everybody was hype. Like this was such a hyped up launch. It sold out so quickly. People were so quick to go and buy it because it was the sister palette, that's how they marketed it, to the Modern Renaissance palette. It was like the more cool toned, fun sister palette to this amazing, incredible palette that everyone loved. The problem is that when reviews started coming in for this palette, normally you would see an ABH review and it was like undoubtedly amazing. The product was going to be good. But when reviews started rolling in from YouTube about this palette, a lot of them were really bad. And then consumers themselves started getting the palettes and the product was really bad. Everything was really hard to blend. It was incredibly powdery. And I remember actually Alyssa Ashley was the first person to really be honest and give a really negative review about this palette. And I remember watching her video and she was like nervous to talk negatively about the brand a little bit. Like she tried a billion different techniques to try to get this palette to work, something that you would never do for other brands, like try a million different ways to get something to work. But because it was Anastasia and they had this reputation, it was like almost she could not believe that it was that bad. And people in the comments were being really, really negative towards her. She got a lot of shit for speaking out against this brand and being like, this product is not good. Like, this is not great. And then everybody got it and they were like, oh yeah, this product is not good. It's not great. I even did, I had 12 subscribers and I did a review on my channel, Smoky Glow, of the Subculture palette. And I hated it too. Everything blended into gray. The shades blended together horribly. You had to have like an advanced degree in color theory to figure out how the fuck to use it. And even if you did, the shades were so powdery and weird to blend. It was just a gigantic letdown, basically. Anastasia especially made a lot of comments about this. Like she basically, and looking back, I can't believe that this wasn't a bigger deal. because I just can't believe that. But looking back, this was messed up. But she basically did this whole Instagram story where she just said that like people were too not good at makeup to figure out how to use it. And the reason it was getting negative reviews was because nobody knew how to use the product properly. And same thing with Norvina. She like linked tutorials on how to properly use the product as a way to tell people like it's not the product, it's you. And it's like if everyone is collectively having the same experience with an eyeshadow palette, maybe it is the product. Just maybe. Look, God, I can't believe that wasn't a bigger issue back in the time. I can't believe how defensive they were. They literally refused to admit that there was anything wrong with the palette. And they were like, nope, this is how we created it. And you guys just suck at makeup. And that's why you can't use it. If you can't use it, you're not a real artist. That was literally like the gist of the whole thing. So even with that sort of subculture drama, the brand still was doing very well. They were very successful. They kept having amazing launches throughout the rest of the year. They did Prism, Sultry, Soft Glam, the Norvina palette. But then we get into the year of 2019. And this is when shit started hitting the fan for Anastasia Beverly Hills. Anastasia Beverly Hills in the year of 2019 started launching more palettes. And you don't think that's a bad thing, but let me explain why this was a big deal. Remember what I said when I was like, they went months in between launching eyeshadow palettes. Every eyeshadow palette had like its moment to shine, its thing, and then they would move on to the next one very gradually. They all were the same consistency. They all had the same formula, minus the subculture. They were all really incredible palettes. And then we started 19 with the Riviera palette, which at first people were like, oh, this is cool. Like it's a colorful palette. People were really freaking out. And then about 3 weeks later, they launched the Alyssa Edwards palette, which was freakily similar to the Riviera palette, just in the sense that it was a very similar color story from the same brand, which was obviously off-putting. And then they launched the Jackie Aina palette, which, can I just pause and say, I feel so bad for Jackie Aina with this collab. I swear to, this was one of my favorite Anastasia palettes to date. It's actually the only one, I think. I think this and Sultry are the only two that I still actually own and use on a consistent basis because they are two of the best palettes. And Sultry got her moment, like she got her whole thing. The Jackie Aina palette did not get the moment that it deserved for how good that palette was. Like, it was like it happened and then we immediately moved on to like Amrezy and Carly by Belle. But nobody who collabed with that brand in 2019 actually got their moment. And there were 4 people that did. Like 4 different people collaborated with this brand in 2019. And I feel like none of them got their fair moment for how good a lot of the palettes were. Like, I can only speak for the Jackie Aina one, but it was fantastic. And I feel like it got really brushed under the rug because of the rapidness at which they were doing all of these collaborations. Like, they had the Jackie Aina one, then they had Amrezy, then they had Carly by Belle. And then they started launching all of these Norvina Pro palettes, like palettes that were named after Norvina. They launched like one every 2 weeks. Like one would come out, it would launch, a bunch of people would buy it, and then another massive jumbo size pro palette would come out 2 weeks later. And then there was another one, and then another one, and then there were minis of that palette. And over time, it just started getting really annoying. I think here's the thing. A lot of people see that situation. Like, they see the fact that Anastasia was putting out so many products, and they're like, well, what's the problem with that? You just have more makeup to choose from, whatever. I think the annoying thing about it was not even that it was like, oh yeah, I guess in theory you have more makeup to choose from. I get that. I think what was annoying consumers was that it was such a drastic shift from how the brand had been operating for the last 3 years. And on top of that, it was very confusing because Norvina tried to give a bunch of different explanations for why it was happening. Like, she was getting pushback on social media. I think the other thing about it too was that you have to remember, like in 2019, the makeup boom had already started to die down a little bit. Like, it was definitely still very popular. The makeup industry was still booming. The makeup industry still is booming, but the overconsumption of products was starting to lessen significantly. And that is when Anastasia Beverly Hills started pumping out products as if they were ColourPop. Like, people and consumers were already getting a little bit tired of constantly buying every new release or collecting makeup just to collect it, or having these drawers full of makeup. Like, people, they were starting to get this fatigue because so many products were coming out all at once, and it was just a little bit overwhelming for a lot of consumers. So Norvina actually started getting backlash for all of these launches, and it gave a couple of different excuses. Still to this day, I'm not sure which one was like the actual real excuse. But basically at first she said that there was production issues happening with the brand, and that was why she was pushing all of these products out all at once, just because there were so many production issues. And she kind of alluded to the fact that it wasn't actually her decision to do it this way, that they just needed to keep up with the fast-paced makeup market, so they were doing more aggressive launches and aggressive releases. Also, I mentioned the Norvina Pro palettes, but I think the reason a lot of consumers were a little bit annoyed with those palettes in particular is because they were initially launched under the Anastasia Beverly Hills name. Like, there was no separation between the Norvina branding and the Anastasia Beverly Hills branding. They were the same thing. They were launched under the same umbrella. And so everyone was assuming when they came out that they were Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes. And it wasn't until much later, when all of the palettes had sort of come out, that Norvina announced that this brand, this Norvina branding, was going to be the polar opposite of Anastasia Beverly Hills and be sort of its own sub-brand within the Anastasia Beverly Hills brand, which is fine. Lots of brands do that. Lots of brands have sub-brands that take place within a main brand. Like, that's not a big deal. But the way that the rollout happened was just so confusing, because for a long time, I think a reason Anastasia was so popular was not only because of everything I've already talked about, but also their branding was really fantastic. Like, they had a level of consistency in their branding that a lot of makeup brands didn't have. You were always knowing what you were going to get. It was going to be classic packaging with the ABH emblem. It was going to be luxurious, but not too crazy overpriced. It was a lot of like pinks and blacks and neutral colors. And just like, even with the eyeshadow palettes, like when they were launching them, you knew it was going to be the same shape with the same sort of fuzzy material that some people loved and some people hated, but you knew what to expect from the brand. There was a level of consistency that a lot of other makeup brands were lacking, especially with its branding and packaging. And when the Norvina Pro palettes came out, they were so out of left field from what we had come to expect from Anastasia Beverly Hills that it was almost jarring and confusing, because here were these big hunking palettes that were super bright and colorful and neon. That was such a drastic shift so quickly from what people had come to expect from ABH. And here's kind of the dicey thing. I don't think that expanding your brand or changing up your branding is a bad thing. Like, I really don't. I think the rollout in how they did the Norvina line was the actual problem. Had Norvina just come out and said, like, this is the subset brand, I'm gonna be doing my own brand underneath the ABH label, here are like 3 of the Pro palettes, this is the first launch from the brand, I don't think anyone would have thought that was weird. I actually think it would have been very successful, because her reasoning behind doing it made sense. She wanted to create something that was a little bit more colorful and playful and unique than what the normal Anastasia Beverly Hills products were. And I don't think that's a bad business move. I think the way they did it just sucked. Having them all released at different times sporadically over the course of like a month, randomly at the end of that month announcing that it was a subset brand, I think just left people feeling very confused about the direction the brand was going. And I also think that people had a lot of distaste for Norvina as a person. And this is where it gets dicey, because I'm going to talk about some of the things she's done as like a business owner, but I don't want to sit here and like shit on her as a person. I don't know her. I've never met her. I have no idea who she is as a person, but I think that Anastasia had a lot of, the person had a lot of credibility. She was like kind of like an OG influencer brand. People in the beginning loved her products and loved the brow products because they also loved her. They loved what she did, the work that she did, the name that she had, the name recognition that she had. And Norvina did not have that same name recognition. Like, she was not an influencer. She didn't really talk about herself. She was never really on TV shows, things like that. She had a Twitter she was pretty active on, but like, people didn't really know who she was. So when she started plastering her name all over a bunch of these palettes and started making herself the face of the brand, especially so quickly, I think that really sat weird for a lot of consumers, and it just like made it seem like she was trying to be the star of the show when she hadn't necessarily done the sort of preliminary work that it takes to be the face of a brand in an influencer capacity. So now we kind of have to talk about the weird stuff that Norvina's done, because there's a lot of it. First thing I want to talk about is the list. I don't want to harp on this list. I've talked about the list a billion times on this channel. I just think it's so bizarre. So basically, oh God, all of this talking about this is like bringing me back to being on Twitter in like 2019, and it's just nuts. So basically Norvina tweeted that she was going to be doing a search for the next ABH PR list. And it was going to be called the List Search. And she basically wanted to find small creators that she could send PR packages to for them to create looks for Anastasia Beverly Hills. And she basically encouraged people to use the Anastasia Beverly Hills products that they already had and create looks with them, sort of asking people to like get her attention with their creativity. My biggest issue with this is, number one, if Anastasia Beverly Hills wanted to showcase smaller artists, find them and post them on your Instagram like every other brand does and pay them to create content for you. They are a billion-dollar brand. They can afford to pay people to create content for them. They do not need a bunch of small creators literally fighting like they're in the Hunger Games to get on a PR list when they could just be finding them on their own and paying them. This was such a cheap marketing technique and it worked. Every single small influencer was constantly posting and tweeting and using ABH products, hashtagging it the list. Literally your entire Twitter feed was like the list, the list, the list. And I don't even blame small creators for doing this. Like, I truly think that this was a manipulative move on Norvina's part, but I don't blame small creators for wanting to get in on having Anastasia Beverly Hills PR. At the time in like early 2019, Anastasia Beverly Hills was still the it brand. And also YouTube itself was still pretty heavily review based. It wasn't so much tutorial based, but it was review based. Same thing with Instagram. People wanted to know reviews. They wanted to know if a product was good or not. And if you were a small influencer and you were able to get a product before everyone else was able to get it, like by buying it, you were able to post your review sooner, which puts you in the algorithm quicker, which could lead to success for your channel. Like, there were a lot of benefits to small creators getting PR. However, a lot of small creators that made content did not make it on the list. There were a lot of people that did, and they got these massive PR boxes, but what this ended up being was just a giant ploy in order to get free promotion from a bunch of smaller micro influencers. Like, that was the whole point. It wasn't to actually uplift or give a fuck about these micro influencers. It was literally just to get free promotion that they didn't have to pay for. Is that a good business technique? Yeah. Do I think that's morally fucked up? Yes. Even when all of this was happening, I remember telling my husband, I was like, she does not care about smaller creators. Like, she does not care about uplifting their artistry. Like, that is not what she cares about. She cares about free promotion. And that was proven to be true when just a year later, basically ABH mass took people off their list. Like, all of those small micro influencers they claimed to believe in and wanted to uplift, they took them all off the list and immediately stopped sending them PR after the hype for the list died down and people stopped posting thousands of pictures with ABH products. They're totally entitled to take people off their PR list. Like, that's their prerogative. PR is supposed to be a gift in the first place, so obviously if you want to stop sending people free stuff, you totally can. But I think it just kind of feeds, but I think it's just a little piece of evidence that feeds into this theory I have that the list from the start was never about uplifting people and was always about basically just trying to scam smaller creators into making free content for Anastasia Beverly Hills. And in 2020, more controversy started surrounding the brand. A bunch of their Glassdoor reviews were leaked onto Reddit, and people had a lot of not so favorable things to say about the brand. A lot of the biggest complaints were that Norvina herself was very, very unprofessional and ran the business in a really strange way. A lot of them talked about the fact that she based a lot of her decisions for the brand off of astrological signs. Like, if Mercury was in retrograde, she like wouldn't launch a palette, which I get being into all of that. But I think running a business based on all of that, especially if you have a bunch of like people who are working underneath you that don't really get that, is a little bit off-putting. Like, it's definitely a little bit strange to run your basically billion-dollar business off of Mercury being in retrograde. A lot of comments people noted that she made about how she only really wanted to hire men, how she wouldn't hire people who were too attractive, or she would only hire someone if they were super attractive. And there were a lot of these reviews. It wasn't just like a couple of different people, like a couple of maybe disgruntled employees. This was like across the board. 90% of their Glassdoor ratings were terrible. And it said that working with Norvina was a terrible experience, which again, when you're trying to start your own subset brand of this major brand that is based around you and your personality starts to become pretty important. An influencer named Taj Reed also came out and talked about the fact that Anastasia Beverly Hills and Norvina herself had basically just screwed her out of money. She was basically supposed to be hired by ABH as a full-time content creator, and she made posts for them that they never paid for. They never got back to her about paying her for them. They offered her a full-time position and then kind of reeled that back and were like, actually, no, we're gonna pay you $1,000 for 4 posts, which is just like not reasonable in any capacity. And when she tried to talk to Norvina about the situation, Norvina basically tried to blame everything on her influencer outreach team instead of taking accountability for making a deal with a person for a full-time position and then basically pulling the rug out from underneath her. As more and more sort of controversy surrounded the brand, I think it definitely hurt the brand's reputation. I'm not gonna say that the brand is not still incredibly successful, because it is. There's a huge number of makeup consumers who don't give a fuck about Norvina and like her shady business practices. But as far as like makeup YouTube goes, I think a lot of people started losing interest in the brand. Number one, because of all of these intense launches happening one after the other. Number two, because I think hearing about who Norvina was as a person behind the scenes was really off-putting, and also hearing that they were screwing small creators out of payment for content was just really unsettling. Like, it just left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I think what once was sort of the golden child brand of YouTube, they now were sort of just like in the background. The spell had been broken. People weren't as obsessed with them as they once were. Their launches were not selling out in seconds the way that they used to. And the hype for the brand in general definitely started to really die down, especially on social media. Also, I feel like it's important to note that they did a collaboration with a literal MLM. I don't really feel like I need to elaborate on that, but they tried to claim ignorance and be like, oh, we didn't know they were an MLM. Okay, it was like a popular MLM. Like, it was like a very popular. And also, if you're gonna be doing like a collaboration with a brand, like literally a full-on collaboration, you don't think you would look into who you're doing business with first? You don't think if you're gonna be making money with this brand, you're not gonna just do a quick Google search that shows that this brand is a certified MLM? Absolutely not. I think all of this made people lose a lot of trust in Norvina, and because she was so heavily ingrained with the face of the brand, it really did start to lead to their downfall. And over the past couple of years, even though they've launched so many different products, there's only been a couple standouts. Like, they came out with the Brow Freeze back in 2021, which was pretty universally liked and thought of as like a really nice, innovative product. They've come out with a bunch of different products since that have been really underwhelming. Like, they had their Primrose palette, which was very reminiscent of their earlier makeup launches in like a bad way. It almost felt like a brand that was once so hyped and talked about and loved and raved. They would launch a palette now and it feels like old and stale and just like not super innovative or interesting for the most part. Yeah, so as all this is happening, trust in Norvina is going down. Her reputation as a brand owner definitely kind of like brought the brand down a little bit. However, up until recently, a lot of people have still had a lot of support for Anastasia herself. People really idolize her and look up to her because she is entirely self-made. She built her business from the ground up. She hustled really hard and worked really hard to get what she had. And I think the kind of overall consensus in the beauty community is that even though people don't have a favorable opinion of Norvina, most people still have a very favorable opinion of Anastasia herself. However, that all changed really recently when an Instagrammer posted a comment that Anastasia herself, on her private account, which is a verified account, Anastasia had left a comment on a post that was basically pro-Putin. There's a lot of disagreements about if this was actually a pro-Putin post or if it was like a post making fun of him. However, given the context, I'm much more inclined to believe it was pro and that Anastasia's response was pro-Putin. Obviously, right now, President Putin of Russia is viciously invading Ukraine and killing thousands of innocent men, women, and children for basically the sake of his own ego. It's much more complicated than that, but there's a lot happening right now internationally. And a very sort of famous anti-vaxxer, pro-Putin, pro-misinformation Instagram account, public figure named Dana Bando, who is more so famous in like Romania. She is pro-Putin. And so when she posted this photo of Putin, it's hard for people to believe that she was posting it in sort of a negative way. It was basically like a shirtless picture of Putin. And a lot of people feel that that was posted as a way to support the actions that he is taking against Ukraine right now. And a lot of people also viewed Anastasia's response to this, which was like a laughing emoji and like a this emoji. A lot of people viewed that as her also supporting Putin. And I think it goes a lot deeper than that, because I do get that people could make the argument that maybe she was like mocking this post and she didn't mean to be in support of him. But the fact that she has been actively supporting and engaging with this person on social media to begin with, like she followed this person. She had interacted with her posts before. She had been on television shows with this person and had been interacting with them and speaking positively about them and complimenting them. And it doesn't end there, because as all of this speculation was growing about why she would be commenting on this person's account, why she would be leaving emojis and comments that seemed somewhat supportive of this pro-Putin propaganda, like why she would be doing this in the first place, a lot of people started looking at who she was actually following on Instagram and really doing deep dives into her social medias, and found that she was following people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Rogan, Trump meme accounts, Candace Owens, Fox News. Like she was following all of these radical right accounts. And while since then there's been people that have been added to her follow list to make it seem more balanced, like she started following Biden shortly after all of this started getting exposed. Once people started really looking into her history and her past, it became abundantly clear that she is very pro-Trump and pro the Republican extremist party. And here's the thing, I already know. Because I remember the Oprah video. I already know that people are going to be like, why does it matter what this person supports? Let people support who they want to support. She is completely allowed to think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is worthy of a follow on Instagram. Like that is totally her prerogative. If she agrees with those ideals, that's absolutely her prerogative. What is my prerogative and your prerogative as a consumer is to know that information and know if I want to be putting money directly into her bank account anymore. And the answer is no. It's actually a resounding no. Anastasia Beverly Hills as a brand has since been posting just basically pro-Ukraine stuff and responding to comments and DMs saying that they are in fact pro-Ukraine, as is Anastasia, but all of the evidence of who she's following and what she's interacting with and what she's been liking when she thought no one was watching points to her actually not believing those things. People who work for the brand could believe those things. They could be pro-Ukraine, they could be anti-Trump, like they could be all of those things. But Anastasia herself, the founder of the brand, is seemingly not those things. And I think the thing to realize here is that brand owners, especially ones who put their literal names in their brands, are a reflection of their brand. They are ambassadors of their brand. They are a representation of their brand. So if they do something like this, like try to engage pro-Putin propaganda or follow people and interact with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it is 100% of the prerogative of consumers who feel that that is morally corrupt to no longer support that brand. It is 1,000% our prerogative. And frankly, it's a little upsetting because it seems like Anastasia is trying to get a lot of things that we're talking about this situation taken down. It seems like they've been taken off the internet. I haven't seen a ton of videos made about this topic or made about this conversation. It seems like in general, a lot of what's been going on has been brushed under the rug. But I've always said this, I think it's really important for people to be informed consumers. I think that Anastasia not addressing this at all and deleting comments related to it or giving really vague responses, not fully addressing what happened and explaining their stance on the situation is just a huge fucking slap in the face. And it's also fucking disgusting. Like, I'm sorry. If you're pro-Putin right now, I disagree with you. Like, I think that that's fucking disgusting. I feel like now, especially as we're into 2022, I don't know when brand owners are going to realize that their actions, they can do whatever they want, but they're going to have reactions. You as a brand owner are responsible for your own public image. And the fact that now Norvina's public image has been pretty severely tarnished based on the way that she's treated small creators, the way that she's not willing to pay people, the way that she bases who she employs by appearances, allegedly, just sits wrong with me. It doesn't sit right with me. And now this about Anastasia and her political beliefs and political affiliations, it doesn't sit right with me anymore. This brand has gone from like literally, in my first video talking about Anastasia, I literally was like, I am a stan. I love this brand. I used to collect their palettes. I used to be so into it. And now I'm just utterly disgusted by the people who own this brand. Utterly disgusted. Cannot believe I ever for a second gave any of them any of my money. Literally can't. If I could go back in time, if I had a time machine, I would go back and stop myself from getting that first Modern Renaissance palette. It's disgusting to me that I ever owned their products. I've been done with this brand for a minute now after I heard about the stuff Norvina pulled with not paying creators their worth, because to me, that's a big issue. Like, I personally feel very strongly that especially small creators, but creators of all sizes, should be paid for their work and you shouldn't have to like harass somebody to get paid for content that you created. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. I was kind of done with the brand at that point. Now I'm really done. Like, now that I know that if I buy an Anastasia Beverly Hills bronzer, that money is possibly going to Republican campaigns to support ideology that I wholeheartedly disagree with, now I'm really done. Right? I just got so heated. I think one of the sadder things about the fall of Anastasia Beverly Hills is honestly just that they're very nostalgic. Like, they're a nostalgic brand for a lot of people. For a lot of people, Modern Renaissance was like their first eyeshadow palette. For a lot of people, their first highlighter was a glow kit. Their first brow pencil was an ABH one. Like, they were so ingrained in the makeup community for, even though it was kind of a short period of time when you think about it, they were so ingrained and just at the top of the makeup community for so long that I think that's why it's kind of hard for people to fully admit that they have not only fallen off as a brand, but the owners have now also fallen off as like human beings that I respect enough to support with my money. I hope that they're able to be replaced by another brand as like a staple for a lot of people. And in a lot of ways, I think they already kind of have been. But yeah, I'm sorry. That whole last part was like a little bit of a rant, but I just got really heated when I found out about this. It actually prompted me to make this entire video. Anyway, that was the evolution of Anastasia Beverly Hills. Let me know your thoughts about everything down below. Do you think there are other contributing factors to why the brand might have fallen off? Do you still think they're like a pop-in makeup brand that everybody is obsessed with? I'm very curious to know everyone's thoughts on this topic. Like, you don't have to feel the same way I feel. This is just my opinion. But yeah, I love you guys so much. I hope you like this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, or just subscribe, or do neither. Honestly, just so happy you're watching me. Thank you so much for being here. My merch, my social media, and also my social justice spotlight, which will have some of the links and organizations that I've been donating to that are in support of Ukraine. And also, because it's International Women's Month, I will have some women-led organizations linked down below. And yeah, I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!